Psychedelic drugs are commonly reported to trigger life-altering, mind-expanding inward journeys. But since being scheduled dangerous and illegal, any therapeutic benefits have gone largely unrecognized. Mental health treatment hasn't changed in generations, limited primarily to psychotherapy and a broad drug class called SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
So there's been no new drug in psychiatry essentially since SSRIs back in the 1980s.
These drugs have varying results, often with side effects, and can be seriously habit-forming.
Once you get on one SSRI, they've got you for life pretty much.
But this model could soon be disrupted by the acceptance of psychedelics by the medical, psychiatric, and pharmacological communities.
This is now coming at the forefront after spending 60 years in hiding.
And these tools actually have remarkable healing potential and have had for thousands of years.
LSD, Psilocybin, DMT, MDMA, and other consciousness-altering compounds, once labeled dangerous and illegal drugs, are coming into the political spotlight. A recent ballot measure in Oregon authorized the legal use of psilocybin by licensed providers. Clinical trials are pressing forward in what could forever change the way we understand and treat both the mind and the body. Investors are flocking to stake their claim in this new frontier of magic molecules.
What is really driving us here is the fact that the efficacy rates here cannot be ignored. They're profound, and money will follow efficacy.
But these investors aren't just hedging their bets. They're true believers, intent on flooding psychedelic startups with the capital they need to invoke a revolution of the mind.
Good morning, and welcome to Day 2 of NobleCon18. Our moderator's 17-year television career includes hosting CNBC's Fast Money, more than a decade with Fox News on hit programs such as The Five and Cashin' In, and now you can watch him daily hosting Eric Bolling, The Balance, on Newsmax. What you may not know is Eric was an award-winning Wall Street securities trader and a professional baseball player with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And now he'll be taking on psychedelics. Please welcome Eric Bolling.
Well, thank you so much. Very nice introduction. Appreciate that. That video it gave you a great introduction to the panel and what we're going to be talking about. But I'd like to first introduce you to two-time Stanley Cup champion and CEO of Wesana Health to tell his true story. Please welcome Daniel Corcillo. Daniel, come on up. Should be on.
Check. Yep. How's everybody doing? Good to be here with you, and look forward to sharing my story and describing to you how I've recovered my brain health and quality of life through using high doses of psilocybin in combination with microdoses of psilocybin. I'll just give you a little background about me. Played 12 years professional hockey. And fought over 164 times in the enforcer role, and was forced into retirement in 2015 after my 7th diagnosed concussion. And that really catapulted me into the last 8 years of understanding what had happened to my brain, and going to some of the best neurologists, CTE brain banks, going to concussion clinics, doing functional neurology, and really just trying to manage symptoms. When I retired, I was dealing with slurred speech, headache, head pressure, insomnia, impulse control issues, on top of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. There's no FDA-approved pharmaceutical for any traumatic brain injury-related symptom. So what we're left with is clinical therapies to manage these types of symptoms. I did the functional neurology, self-deprivation tanks, hyperbaric chamber, changing my diet, trying everything in my power to recover my brain health using these clinical therapies. I got about 5 years into this. This was 3 years ago, and nothing was getting better. So every 6 months, I would change modalities. I would take a QEEG. and then I would check my blood work to see if it moved the needle. And I'd kept hearing about psilocybin and what it could do from a neuronal standpoint, waking up brain hemispheres that were shut down due to trauma, and it was kind of my last-ditch effort to save my life. And I took a invitation to a farm in Denver, in a decriminalized city, and did 5.6 grams of psilocybin. This is very much experiential medicine, meaning on a high dose level, it has the ability to show you what is wrong and face that trauma and then move past it. That obviously doesn't speak to what it's doing in the brain. And I was on the farm for about 2 weeks. Woke up that next morning. I describe it as feeling the way I should. My symptomology started to fall away within a 2-week period. And I made a microdose regimen with a PhD biochemist and took that home and started to tweak with milligram amounts and different types of protocols. And essentially, 6 months in, after 2 high-dose ceremonies, 3 months apart, and then a very specific regimen, I retested my brain, took my blood work. My QEEG came back for the first time in 5.5 years with no abnormalities. And my blood work, cortisol, free testosterone, was all equalized. So I started to delve into the science, started to understand that here was a drug that could do all of the things that the functional neurologists were trying to do in diagnosing a part of my brain that was shut down due to trauma, and then using clinical therapies like neurofeedback and ocular exercises to stimulate this area to make these new neuronal pathways and around the trauma, and essentially, you're feeling better, you're fixed. So it's obviously changed my life. I came to recovery and then finding, this regimen, understanding that, it was novel and that I could, start down a journey of creating a championship team, founding a company, filing IP, and developing this medicine through the FDA. And we had our pre-IND meeting on March 11th, which was really successful in our eyes. It was a written response. We're leading with traumatic brain injury related major depressive disorder. And the FDA said a few different things. They asked us to look at a broader population in major depressive disorder. We submitted a 375-page briefing booklet just describing all of the safety around psilocybin and CBD. They are allowing us to use the 505(b)(2) pathway for CBD, leveraging the data from Epidiolex. We use the IB from Wesana. We are using a polymorph B in synthetic psilocybin and synthetic CBD and optimizing that through our novel formulation work. They accelerated our program, so they moved us into a phase 1, 1B, 2A, so they want us to go right into our population. And they accepted our full pharm tox program, and something that's different about the therapy that we're working on, it has to do with a loading dose or a high dose of psilocybin, which will be done in a clinic with supervision, so that you can manage the preparation and the setting and help people through what they're going to see on this medicine as far as hallucinations. And then there's a chronicity of therapy with the low-dose subperceptual microdose in combination with the CBD. And they accepted everything. They were amendable to a self-administered dose that'll live on your counter in a lockbox. And they also, we went to the division of neurology for a very specific reason. We have a pre-IND number on migraine as well. because there are good CGRPs out there and being developed, they asked us to look at 3 orphan indications that were similar to migraine. So it was a very successful meeting, and just happy to be on our way in a defined pathway forward with the FDA. We're going to be speaking to other regulatory bodies as well, the MHRA later in May, and then following that up with Health Canada. So yeah, just grateful to be here and tell you more about Wesana Health as the day goes on.
Dan, that's a fantastic story, amazing story, really. Okay, so let's introduce the rest of the panel members, and they'll come up, and then we'll get the discussion going. He served as the CEO of Advent RX Pharmaceuticals and purchased a controlling interest at a pre-market valuation of $700,000. He raised over $80 million and uplisted the company, which resulted in a valuation of over $500 million. He has broad experience in the investment management and banking business. He's now CEO of Psybio Therapeutics. I'm sorry. Let's welcome Evan Levine. Did I say it right? Psybio. Sorry, Psybio Therapeutics. Evan Levine. And he's a board member of Bass Fiber Technologies and CEO of recently acquired Mazza Innovation. After 10 years experience in research, development, and commercialization of novel extraction technologies, he's now CEO of Filament Health. Let's welcome Ben Lightburn. Ben. With more than 25 years experience in management, mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and corporate finance, he held senior positions at Cerberus Capital, GE, and Arthur Andersen. He was integral in the private equity consortium that acquired Albertsons and led that company from $10 billion to $60 billion during his tenure. He's currently the CEO of a leading cannabis company, Schwazze. Let's welcome Justin Dye. Justin. We heard Dan's story. It's fantastic, and we'll get a little bit more in that. But for Evan, let's start with Evan, the psychedelics, and there's some prepared questions, folks, and we'll do this. I would love to keep this free flowing. So while these gentlemen tell their stories and have their presentations and speak to you, if you have a question, raise your hand. Let's not wait till the end. If there's something that some of this stuff is pretty complicated. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll clarify some of the things. So just get my attention and we'll ask. So psychedelics have been used in traditional medicine and religious ceremonies for centuries. Is there any historical evidence of efficacy or benefits? Is there any scientific evidence or studies that suggest psychedelics have a benefit in psychiatric conditions? Now, we heard Dan's story, but let's talk to you, Evan. Please expand on that.
Certainly, thank you. So I'm sure everybody here is familiar with this. You're interested in the space. It's actually quite fascinating to me. As described, I've been working in different areas of life sciences, from capital markets to running a public company for years and years. And I got interested in the space because I just had a premonition that the movement was coming. And late 2018, I read a book, Waking Up, by Sam Harris, an author I'm a huge fan of. And he talked about his experiences as an undergrad in Berkeley of using a significant amount of psychedelic drugs. The fascinating part of this book is he evolved so much that by the end he said that he could reach these elevated heights of these mystical experiences without even taking a drug, just by meditation. So I found it all fascinating. I thought to myself, to be perfectly honest, there seems to be a business here. But referring to your question about the efficacy, we said these things have been used for thousands upon thousands of years. There's evidence of early man, depicted in cave paintings using these. We believe that animals gravitated towards these drugs. We know that spiritual healers were using them. Now, were the spiritual healers healing anything? Do they know if they're healing anything? Probably not. They know that there was an effect when you ingest these substances. So it really was for mystical and spiritual purposes. But then when Albert Hofmann was able to synthesize psilocybin LSD in the 1940s, my understanding is thousands upon thousands of patients were treated in clinical trials for indications we're discussing today: anxiety, depression, PTSD, and substance abuse. And the results are indisputable that this had a major impact. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we could make an argument, they made it into the recreational market in 1970, got turned off by this Controlled Substances Act. But the results were indisputable. You fast forward to 2000 when research went underground. Johns Hopkins stepped up and was the first to get an FDA approval to put these substances into humans, started doing studies, and then 20 years later, here we are with this amazing emerging industry and a bunch of incredible companies doing work that I think is going to be world-changing.
Great. Hey, for Ben Lightburn, just as the opium poppy produces morphine and other opioid compounds, mushrooms that produce psilocybin make other psychedelics. I guess it's similar. The similar question: Do you think they have therapeutic value?
Is this on? Yeah. In fact, we actually know that they have therapeutic value. So the magic mushroom produces a whole range of different compounds. And in fact, as Evan said, over thousands of years, it's actually been the magic mushroom that people have been consuming, right? Synthetic psilocybin didn't arrive until 1958. So we actually know there's actually a lot more evidence for the safety and efficacy of, naturally derived psychedelics as opposed to synthetically produced psychedelics. But getting back to the question about, do we know about other compounds in the magic mushroom? Well, the answer is yes. A good example is a compound called psilocin. Psilocin is the active form of psilocybin. So contrary to popular belief, psilocybin is actually not active in the human body. It has to convert through a process called dephosphorylation into psilocin. And psilocin is what actually crosses the blood-brain barrier and is what is responsible for all the therapeutic and hallucinogenic effects. Psilocin is also present in the magic mushroom, right? So when we extract and make an extract of the magic mushroom, we make psilocybin, psilocin, and many other minor compounds, baeocystin, norbaeocystin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the interesting things about, I'm going on and on about one compound, psilocin, but just to prove a point, is that psilocin, when you manufacture it synthetically, is very unstable. And for that reason, up till now, all medical research has actually been done with synthetically prepared psilocybin, and no clinical trial has actually directly administered psilocin in order to assess its benefits, whether there are any relative to administering psilocybin. So anyway, so the long-winded way of saying yes.
Allow me to maybe clarify something you said on the way. And you had said that the effect were therapeutic and hallucinogenic, and you separated them. Can you tell me why?
Because some people take magic mushrooms to get high and to hallucinate, and some people take magic mushrooms to treat, to therapeutically treat diseases that affect them or are inhibiting their quality of life. But it's a good question. One of the big questions in the psychedelics industry is whether the therapeutic effect can be separated from the hallucinogenic effect, or can be separated from the requirement to have a therapist present. The prevailing view is no, that therapy is required, and it's actually the altered state of consciousness that you are put into that enables the therapist to kind of get in there and help you work through whatever issues. And purists would say that, in fact, bad trips, what you hear about bad trips is people dealing with very bad experiences. These might be repressed memories that are coming up to the surface, that these are actually a good sign, right? These are a sign that progress is being made, that real work is being done in order to address whatever historical trauma might be causing your current symptoms.
Great. For Justin Dye, while it might seem unusual to have someone from the cannabis industry on this panel, you bring an amazing perspective to the discussion. What brought you into the cannabis industry, and do you see similarities in terms of the development of psychedelics to that of the widespread acceptance of cannabis? And I guess maybe this may be getting at, did the cannabis industry precede these gentlemen, the rest of the gentlemen on the panel?
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and it's nice to be with all of you. One, I'm taking as many notes as you are. We have a biosciences business at Schwazze where we're studying minor cannabinoids, et cetera. Obviously, this is a terrific topic as well. I think if you look at treating pain, depression, anxiety, sleep, I think all of these things that we're talking about are real. I think if you look at the business around cannabis or psilocybin, I think it's obviously going to be a big opportunity for a number of participants. So the reason I got into this was my father was a Vietnam veteran, PTSD, was hit, Purple Heart survivor in Vietnam, and cannabis has been a part of his life and something that I've been interested in. And I think if you look at how individuals are embracing this, et cetera, particularly on the cannabis side, I think that can provide an architecture for how other psychedelics are handled. I think first you start with medical. It's very important that we watch and maintain that you have clinical practitioners treating patients first and doing this in a very deliberate way where it's not getting in the hands of children, et cetera. And we have data and clinical data around treating different patients, et cetera. So I think you're going to see this follow the way where you're going to see, if you look at the big 4 states in the United States, it's Washington, it's Oregon, it's California, it's Colorado, that I think will step into embracing new technologies such as we're talking about here today. And I think if you look at Denver, it was the first place that decriminalized psilocybin. And we have a panel going on today, which is very exciting. The sky has not fallen since we decriminalized it in Denver. We have not seen any issues with public health. And in general, I think this is going to be adopted. Obviously, you're seeing Washington, D.C., Ann Arbor, Michigan, other places decriminalizing this. So I think you're going to see medical, and then eventually I think you'll see recreational use, et cetera, like we've seen in cannabis.
Dan, you said after your injuries and after you left hockey, all the trauma that you took, that you tried various things. You said you tried cannabis?
Yeah, cannabis was a part of the regimen. So when I went to this farm to learn about psilocybin, I also left with this PhD biochemist was using CBD kief, growing it organically, and using it in combination with USDA certified organic mushrooms like lion's mane, reishi, cordyceps, chaga, agarikon, and turkey tail. We made a product. We included, turmeric and piperine, and I combined that with the microdoses of psilocybin in just very specific ratios, and got better quickly, very quickly. I probably could have tested my brain and my blood at 3 months in, but I waited about 6 months. Now, psilocybin on a large dose scale has, things that we're not talking about, for purposes of using the synthetic psilocybin and CBD and going through the FDA, but they have amazing anti-inflammatory and neuronal benefits. CBD is the only patented neuroprotectant on earth, patented by the U.S. government in 2003 against neuronal death, specifically as it relates to Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia. So I knew about these two compounds. I knew from just a neuronal standpoint and looking at the research that Robin Carhart-Harris has done at the Imperial College of London, putting people under fMRI while they're on psilocybin and the neuronal crosstalk that happens was crucial to waking up the brain hemispheres that were specifically shut down in me. And I truly believe I've seen people get better with just a microdose, which obviously fits into the biotech space and through the FDA a lot better than creating a clinical network for and also training therapists to be able to have the ability to sit with somebody when you're hallucinating. But MAPS is in phase 3 with the FDA using MDMA for PTSD. And the requirement there is 2 therapists, 2 MAPS trained therapists, and the prescription will look like it will come with 42 hours of talk therapy, 12 90-minute non-drug sessions. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned before, on a high dose, this is very experiential medicine. You prepare somebody, you understand their trauma, you go into a clinic, you administer the compound. In this case, we'll stick to MDMA for PTSD. This person is able to access their trauma and move past it through talking with the therapist. So there's the preparation part, there is the actual ceremony or clinical therapy, and then there's the integration. But this is all in combination with psychotherapy. And 67% of the respondents in phase 2 who used MDMA for PTSD no longer qualified for PTSD. And so, the Boston Consulting Group report came back that the 3-year public benefit to doing that is over $70,000. So we're thinking that that is the ceiling for a fully reimbursable treatment like MDMA for PTSD, and it'll follow a very similar line with psilocybin. And for everybody in the room, Compass Pathways is in phase 2B, so encourage to go and look at that data. And yeah, I just started reading all of the studies from Johns Hopkins and NYU, and if it can take end-of-life anxiety away from cancer patients that are terminal, it's a very exciting compound and potential for sure.
Evan, can you talk to us a little bit about where we are on the regulatory spectrum for all the things we're talking about?
Certainly. Well, Dan touched on his actions he's taking with the FDA. We're actually doing something similar, but a little bit of background of what we're doing. We're a fully integrated life sciences company. We have 3 different laboratories up in Ohio. We have a discovery laboratory. We have about 50 participants in there working on synthesizing new molecules. The foundation of our technology is using genetically modified bacteria to grow psychedelic drugs. That's where our IP lands. And the way this came about was in 2019, a young professor at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, got published in Journal Metabolic Engineering for actually what was a research first. He was able to use a recombinant host and very efficiently turn it into psilocybin and side products. We went in and formed a collaboration and formed a company around this discovery, and very quickly went from the bench to commercial manufacturing. So with psilocybin itself, our value added here is that we're competitive against other manufacturing methods. We are able to take with starting materials very efficiently, put them into a bioreactor with genetics. In about 2.5 days, we get extracellular psilocybin, 1 purification step. The technology that's used now is generally a chemical synthetic, and it's very expensive to make. It's arduous, it's difficult, it could take up to 2 weeks. You have starting materials, then you have 5 different steps where you need to scale and purify. So it's a complex methodology, and it's far more expensive. So our psilocybin, biosynthetic psilocybin, we can make this at a tiny fraction of the price that the chemical synthetic is produced. However, that was just the beginning. We have a platform technology, and we have now identified over 100 molecules that we filed intellectual property on. Second laboratories there, we have our own animal facility in our company. So on a daily basis, we're testing different molecules, different combinations in multiple different rodent models. And rodent models are not human models yet. None of this has been in humans, but we have now about 6 clinical candidates for our 2nd generation molecule that are demonstrating in well-standardized rodent models. First, we look at head twitch to determine if these rats are hallucinating. We really don't know if they're hallucinating, but this is the accepted model. If they get a wet dog shape, we believe that they're going into this mystical response. But we also look at a lot of behavioral methods. We look at sucrose preference testing, elevated maze, anxiolytic testing, social avoidance testing. We have a rat casino to determine their desire to gamble. So we're doing all this on a daily basis in our own laboratories. And what I find really exciting, I think psilocybin, however it's delivered, is going to be an amazing product. I think it is far more valuable. We have to start off somewhere. So we're starting off in mental health, neurological conditions. But it's being discussed as a panacea out there for almost any behavioral thing. And I think it's going to have a far deeper reach. So these other molecules that we're testing in the lab, though, are demonstrating in the rodents that they do not elicit hallucinogenic response, yet they are having equivalent antidepressive and anti-anxiolytic activity as psilocybin and compared to Prozac as well. So our strategy, long-winded, sorry, we had our first pre-IND meeting fourth quarter last year. We're going to have a second meeting in the next couple of months. We're going in planning a commercial study in biosynthetic psilocybin. We believe that it's necessary. We want to get this approved. It's a good comparator, and it's going to build out our clinical network to start bringing additional compounds into the clinic. But we're expecting to file our IND later this year, and we'll be going into randomized controlled clinical trials later this year.
Great, thank you. Ben, there are several ways to get FDA approval. One of them is with the assistance of the Department of Defense. Has anyone approached the Defense Department to help speed up the process of FDA approval?
So we have Robert Kaufman on our board. He headed up Walter Reed's Medical Center for 32 years. We're actually sitting down with the DoD and DARPA at the end of May, and they've put a special task force together to look at MDMA and psilocybin for various treatments, mainly with MDMA for PTSD coming online first, and how impactful that can be. They're allotting funds to, and a team to just, like everybody else is doing in this room, understand what I believe will be the new standard of care for a multitude of CNS disorders.
Okay, let me ask you this one, Ben. And by the way, Dan, I know that I've been involved in some of these medical pharma groups, and the Department of Defense, by the way, is a fantastic way to speed up the FDA process. Anyway, so Ben, I'm sorry, let me ask you this question. Where do you think is there a difference in the regulatory approval process for the synthetic versus the natural psilocybin?
As it comes to FDA, so the answer is yes. There are many different pathways that we can see psilocybin becoming approved for use. Even within the pharmaceutical regulatory pathway, there are different avenues. For instance, our drug candidates are all what are called botanical drugs. That means that they're extracted from natural sources, in our case, magic mushrooms and other psychedelic herbs. And what makes them unique is that they actually contain all of the secondary metabolites, all the secondary compounds from the magic mushroom, make it through our extraction and purification process and into the final product. And the reason for doing that is because we think that we can prove that the combination of all these different drugs, all these different compounds together can prove to provide a therapeutic benefit over just the single isolated compound, in the case of magic mushroom, psilocybin, right? This is something that in the cannabis industry we talk about colloquially as the entourage effect. It's not yet known whether that effect exists in psychedelics. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence and limited animal clinical evidence that it does exist. But the point is, until one actually produces a botanical formulation and puts it into a clinical trial, we can't actually begin to get the evidence. So anyways, botanical drugs do have a very specific development pathway within the FDA. One of the questions we often get, well, if you're natural, then that must mean that you're just, recreationally focused. And it's actually not true, right? That the FDA has a specific way for people to make natural botanical drugs and get them approved. And it's slightly different, but largely similar to the pathway that a synthetically manufactured or a biosynthetically manufactured compound would have to achieve. In addition to what we could say sort of FDA approval, what we're seeing in states like Oregon is that they are legalizing psilocybin outside of the FDA framework. And this is where it gets really interesting because no one really knows how it's going to play out. Psilocybin remains a federally controlled substance, and yet you have states that are proceeding towards legalization. The states are very careful to make sure that the market that they're setting up is not considered to be a therapeutic market. So for instance, the nomenclature that they use in Oregon State is that someone that comes to one of the service centers, that's what they call the service center, is going to be a client, right? It's not going to be a patient. There's not going to be a therapist. Clients in Oregon will be able to come and pay for psilocybin experiences for any reason, right? It doesn't have to be because they're depressed or because for anything other than they feel like trying it. And so, like I said, we don't exactly know how all the rules are going to shake out. The rules are all still in draft form. But one thing that they have done is they've prohibited all forms of production of psilocybin besides natural means in Oregon. So that's just another example.
So I agree with you 100%. And we won't really know if there's an entourage effect. We actually refer to it as innate synergy. Some of these experiments that we're doing in the animals, we have actually demonstrated that there is this innate synergy, that we don't share a lot of the data because it's all under patent pending protection, but we have demonstrated that in one of these serious experiments, we could reduce the amount of psilocybin by 50%, increase one of these other compounds that Ben is referring to, and we do get this innate synergy, that we see a more profound response in the therapeutic benefit of the animals. So we're going in the same direction.
I'll just expand with just specific language. So Oregon, Denver, this is not legalization, this is decriminalization. So you're allowed to possess these compounds, you're allowed to grow them, gift them, without the fear of prosecution. So I just want to make a really clear distinction. And I personally don't believe that these compounds will ever see the light of day in a recreational context. State by state, you may have states like Oregon, working outside of that therapeutic context from the FDA, but it doesn't follow a prescription, and they are using naturally grown mushrooms, which obviously falls well outside of the 0.1% variance with the FDA. So I just want to be really clear on that language.
Interesting comment that you don't see that this would ever proceed to the recreational level. I'm wondering, Justin, would you agree with that? Because we all know there was medicinal marijuana. It kind of paved the way for the not only decriminalization but the legalization of cannabis or marijuana almost universally.
Well, in the United States, welcome to the federalist system, right? So it's state versus the national government. I think you're going to see, I've worked on the West Coast, I think you're going to see, my guess is it will become recreational at some point in time in certain states, and that's why we're up here on the panel, is to create a little difference of opinion. But I think, as I said, just go look at Washington, go look at Oregon, go look at California, look at Colorado, and I think you're going to continue to see them blazing trails in the U.S. And certainly the work needs to be done that these gentlemen are doing on the research side, et cetera. But I would tell you we're studying that from a cannabis perspective. So we have, we're in Denver, we're in Colorado, we're in New Mexico.
If this proceeds and they get regulatory approval and it becomes a widespread use for treating depression, PTSD, trauma, whatever, concussion, does that put your industry behind them? Are they a stronger form of what you're selling?
No, I think it adds. I mean, if you look at the business model that we have both on the medical side as well as on the recreational side, I think it's additive. So I think having distribution channels to do that, I think clearly it will go the way of medical cannabis, where you have a caregiver. I mean, if you look at what used to happen in Colorado, you had medical caregivers who were growing in their basements. They would then go provide treatment and medicine to their patient, typically in cancer patients, around pain, appetite, et cetera. So I think depending on what you're treating, I think certainly you're going to have certain health states that are going to be only medical. But I think we'll find our way to more recreational use.
Several $100 billion industry, the antidepressant industry. Is this going to take over for the SSRIs? Is that right? SSRIs?
SSRIs, yeah. I believe there's potential. In our 375-page briefing booklet, we described pretty distinctly similar mechanisms of action with Zoloft that CBD and psilocybin take and work on. Psilocybin specifically on the 5-HT2A receptor. So I think that there's a lot of value to understanding how to not only offer the large doses, but also take the hallucination out of psilocybin. And it's not necessarily by changing the molecule, it is just by quite literally lowering the dose to make it subperceptual, non-hallucinogenic, and over a longer period of time, we believe that we're trying to follow a path of birth control where the patient won't know if it's placebo or the actual microdose or drug, and they could take it as a chronicity of therapy over time, because psilocybin specifically has a waning effect. We've seen that in the phase 2B with Compass. Robin Card-Harris studies have proven it out, and it's essentially, why nothing gets fixed in 5 hours, right? So you have to continually introduce it, and it fits nicely into, what the FDA is used to seeing.
Just a note about SSRIs. Unfortunately, many people here are probably familiar with them, either for themselves or for their family members. These are compounds that came out in the 80s, haven't changed since, and are still the standard of care for most depression-related areas. They only have a 30% chance of working on the first course, and it takes several months to actually figure out whether that effect is present. So most people actually have to try multiple courses over many months. And even after several courses, the chance that SSRI works for you is only 60%. And along with SSRIs come side effects. There's weight gain, there's lack of sexual function, people report a zombie-like state. So when we ask, does psilocybin have the potential to replace SSRIs? I say, hopefully, because, SSRIs are really failing a lot of people, and yet they are the standard of care. So just wanted to add that point.
Are there any side effects?
Of psilocybin? I think a lot of people would consider the hallucinogenic experience to be a side effect.
But not weight gain, sexual dysfunction, suicidal tendencies?
So there are reports of increased suicidal ideation from various psilocybin clinical trials.
But that's there with all the drug commercials for Zoloft and Lexapro. One of the main side effects is suicidal tendencies. I'm trying to think, well, then what's the point?
Of course, and this is one of the tragic aspects of depression research, is you're dealing with a suicidal population.
Mm-hmm, right.
And one of the things that manifests itself with depression research is that a highly depressed person coming into a trial usually by definition has failed several treatment courses, and they know that this trial, the psilocybin trial, might be their last-ditch attempt to be cured. And if, for whatever reason, the psilocybin or whatever treatment you're investigating doesn't work, their tendency to have suicidal thoughts can actually increase. So it's actually it's not known whether the suicidal ideation, the increases come from the intervention, the psilocybin itself, or it comes from
I guess the study could be comparing it to the SSRIs, the rate.
Yes. So in the Compass Pathway 2B, there were an increase in suicidality or suicidal ideation in 3 patients at the highest dose, at the 25 milligram dose. There was also efficacy at the 10 milligram and the 3 milligram, which speaks to the fact that you do not need the high doses and the long, drawn out, call it 5 to 7 hour psilocybin trip to show efficacy. So staying in the range of those lower doses and having it fit into a clinical therapy like Spravato, which is FDA approved, S-ketamine, which we deliver through our clinics, because you're going to need to be able to deliver MDMA through a very specific clinical network. With that prescription, you have to stay in our clinic for 2 hours after you take it intranasally. So can we get to a point where the burden isn't on the therapist and you have to train hundreds of thousands of therapists? There's not enough therapists in the world that can sit with major depressive disorder or people that suffer from it. And it's quite specifically why Compass went after treatment-resistant depression, because like me, you're at the end of your rope. To Ben's point, you've tried so many other treatments. You kind of throw your arms up and dive in.
Quickly, before I want to get a couple of questions in, but go ahead, Justin.
Just one comment. So from a capital perspective and investing perspective, if you think we have a mental health issue, we just came through the pandemic, I think we all would say yes.
Yeah.
I think if you ask, do we have an opioid issue today, the answer is yes. So is research like this going to receive funding? Is it going to attract pools of capital? The answer is yes. And I think, the sector is going to continue to attract capital. And I think folks like these companies and ours are going to continue to attract capital, which I think is good for research.
Yeah, a little personal note. I don't know if you know my history. I lost my only child, my son, to an opioid overdose at University of Colorado, sophomore. And subsequently got involved in the opioid awareness world. But I will tell you that this is not a political issue. This issue, what Justin just pointed out, crosses the political divide. Both the right and the left agree that we do have we have mental illness issues, we have addiction issues, and we do have an opioid crisis happening. So I agree with you. I work with the Trump administration. They were very aggressive. When it turned over to the Biden administration, they welcomed me with open arms, and they were very aggressive with it too. So the good news is whatever's going on here is not going to be held up by politics, and that's one of the very few issues in America that won't.
And I think it feels good to participate and be on the right side of history and making a difference, and I think that's why we're all here.
Good.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear about your son and that tragedy. And I just want to say something. The FDA, knowing that we have this pre-IND number on migraine, actually pushed us, or is suggesting that we look at an orphan indication where patients are essentially, catatonic, or their only course of use are opiates. So I think that they're also craving something that could possibly, correct the mistake of that.
The point
epidemic.
is, these guys are in the right place at the right time right now. Sir, you had a question. The question is, what are the perceived or actual dangers of the psychedelics? Anyone want who?
As far as perceived dangers, the side effect of taking a high dose of psilocybin is, so this medicine, when you go into therapy, it exasperates what's at the forefront of your mind. So if you have somebody that is suicidal, you just need to prepare them for what they're about to see, and what they're about to see, what this medicine shows you in MDMA, is the trauma. It will bring up what you have been through. So for example, in the MDMA trials, there's a lot of sexual abuse survivors. And what this medicine does, when you take it and you prepare correctly for what you're about to see with a therapist that can talk to you and help you, guide you through what you will relive, that sexual trauma, you have a less heightened emotional response, because MDMA dampens the amygdala response. So you're able to, for a woman or a man who's been sexually abused, talk through, look at it, and then move past it, essentially, right? So it doesn't govern the rest of your life. And that is why 67% of the respondents in these trials no longer qualify for PTSD after 12 weeks of talk therapy and 1 to 3 administrations of the actual drug in clinic. So I hope that makes sense.
Let me accentuate one thing. In addition, from a clinical pharmacology perspective, these drugs are not addictive. These drugs are actually very, very safe. You really can't overdose on them unless you consume your entire body mass of them and choke to death. So they're extraordinarily safe. We're all talking about this because they are mostly used recreationally, but they are illicit. These are Schedule I drugs. Agreeing and Dan, we are going through the FDA and the DEA. So we're going up against two federal agencies to move these products forward. I do not believe that in any time in my young lifetime that we're going to see these being sold like cannabis in dispensary. I think that is too much of a battle. Cannabis is still federally illegal, although we're hoping very soon that that will change, and a lot of states do allow it. But this is a whole other animal. These are much more powerful. They do have these extraordinarily healing benefits, so it's going to be much more beneficial for the pharmaceutical business to take over this kind of product. And also, magic mushrooms are highly variable. And I personally believe street drugs are very dangerous because you have no idea what you're consuming. You have no idea what the consistency is, even if you know where you're getting it. And when you grow these magic mushrooms, you could have a multifold variation in the crop. And the only way to really know what's in them is to put them under liquid chromatography or some other imaging devices, which a grower would not be doing. So we believe that going through the FDA is going to be the shortest and possibly only path to giving public access and patient access to these drugs.
Evan, you should come to Vancouver, British Columbia. You will see a recreational market and dispensaries that actually already operate in the open. They're completely illegal, but they do exist. You can actually go to stores that say magic mushrooms for sale and walk in and buy magic mushrooms.
Yeah, they're online too.
They're online too, and they look just like any other supplement company. And when interviewed, the police go, well, we have fentanyl gangs to chase, right? And we don't care about magic. That's literally what they say. So I think that a recreational market is probably going to come sooner than we think. And in fact, we should repeat that the recreational market already exists. It's just an illegal market, right? The recreational cannabis market existed for forever. It was just an illegal market. But what I also agree with you on is the variability of magic mushrooms. In our research, we show that even mushrooms from the same flush can have plus or minus 5 times the amount of psilocybin. And when you consider how strong and how potent of a substance psilocybin is, the difference between 5 milligrams of psilocybin and 25 milligrams of psilocybin, for those that are experienced in such things, it's a huge difference. So it's very important that we find ways of standardizing and labeling, even microdosing, right? If you're taking half a gram of a mushroom, you don't know if there's 1 milligram or 5 milligrams of psilocybin in there. That makes even just the word psilocybin, right? People often use the word psilocybin to refer to magic mushrooms, when really what that word means is the chemical compound inside magic mushrooms, which can vary greatly from different mushrooms to different mushrooms.
I want to accentuate one word you used several times: illegal.
Right.
I live in California, and we have some pretty bizarre politics there and odd laws. And for some reason, our government in California allows criminals to walk into department stores and walk out with $999 worth of goods without prosecution. Correct. It is a recreational market. It's been that way for 75 years, but it is illegal. And if you become known, you could be prosecuted for it. I mean, nobody is going to get arrested for having a couple of grams of substance on them. There's just not enough law enforcement. There's not enough law enforcement for most crime, like white-collar crime is so rampant, you just can't stop it. But we want to operate under a legal framework.
Yeah, I think we all want to operate under a legal framework and have regulation, but I can give you an example, and this is why it's interesting. So in cannabis, individuals can open a store in California, they can sell cannabis, and they are closed without getting prosecuted, and then they can go open a store 2 miles away in another month and reopen. So there's sort of the pragmatic approach to this that I think, look, we got to have rules around it. We got to test it, make sure it's safe for the public. But, we can debate whether it's going to be medical or there will be a recreational market. My guess is capital finds ways to help people, and I think you're going to see that.
Yeah. Let's she's patient.
Three approaches. How long is stayed in your body? The brain has receptors to this kind of chemicals, like the cannabis, because we know after the research, like the brain has receptors to cannabis naturally. And how do you approach the marketing and the way that you educate the people before even go to the boom of this is the solution for everything?
So two questions were, one were, I guess, more medical. How long does it stay in your body, and how long, I guess, is it effective? Let's start with that one, and the second one being, how do you market it? But let's start with the first one.
Yeah, so I'll grab how long does it stay in your body. I mean, the pharmacokinetics are going to vary on dose. That's a very simple answer. We talked here about 1 milligram, 5 milligrams, 25 milligrams. It depends on the dose, and the higher the dose, there's threshold doses, we believe about 25 milligrams. People have taken much more. The more you take, the longer you're going to be in the experience.
You mean for some sort of a drug screening for work, you mean? Something like that?
So, I mean, there's no test for psilocybin. It would have to be a test that, tests the amount of air in your lungs, similar to, LSD.
So it's not part of a standard drug screening for employment.
If you're asking, what the half-life of psilocybin is, there seems to be, there's a bunch of different protocols on microdosing. One that seems to work the best is once every 3 days. From the standpoint of, I've obviously only worked with psilocybin. To Ben's point, you can convert psilocybin with acidity. You can manipulate and break it down into psilocybin before you actually take it, before a ceremony, to have a much shorter trip and effect, a faster onset, and obviously a faster offset. But on average, if you're taking above 3 grams and you are, getting a good source of mushroom, you'll be hallucinating for minimum of 4 to 5 hours.
Okay. Sorry, you had a question.
What part of the brain does psilocybin work in? And two, Daniel, we have all these young kids playing soccer nowadays, and I think the manifestation of some brain damage won't show up for years to come. Mm-hmm. And this could possibly be a treatment, but that's a bigger topic.
So what part of the brain does it work on? And the second part of the question, I didn't catch it. Good.
So psilocybin, after it converts into psilocin is a partial 5-HT2A receptor agonist, and also a partial agonist on many other receptors. And we think that this agonism for multiple receptors is actually what makes it a very useful therapeutic tool. I didn't catch the second question.
Second part of the question, sir.
Daniel, we have all of these young people playing soccer, and they had to go up the path of the trying tour, and also the bank head. Are we going to see a problem down the road with these young people?
So there's definitely a link to repetitive head trauma that causes concussion to the head or body. The subconcussive hits are also, changing people's brain chemistry, and what you're seeing is just a higher link to neurodegenerative disease like dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, more specifically CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's a different entanglement of tau proteins than Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but one of my teammates who passed away at 34 years old, Steve Monador, had 19 concussions. He was a 34-year-old man. He had stage 3 CTE. So there's a definite link. How can we guard against it? I mean, I was suffering from mild depression or mild dementia, absolutely. I had brain fog, brain fatigue. I was extremely slow. My speech was slurred. I was isolated. I felt like a shell of myself. And this was pretty quickly after I retired, only 2 years in. And I don't suffer from those symptoms anymore.
How long did it take for you to rid yourself of the symptoms with therapy?
Like I said, I probably could have tested myself 3 months in, but I waited 6 months. I did 2 high doses, and then the microdosing regimen. There's a washout period after the high dose because you don't want to invoke the hallucinations, and then I retested my brain, and everything was clear. And so there's other parts of the brain that this works on as well, which is the default mode network. So psilocybin seems to dampen the activity in the default mode network, where essentially we hold our sense of self, and then it heightens the communication and the neuronal crosstalk of the right and left brain hemispheres. And that's one of the main reasons why I thought, after seeing the study under fMRI, that this could be the first treatment for traumatic brain injury. I know a lot of people who are using this now that have Parkinson's. MS seems to work on the vestibular system and help people with their balance issues. So there's more research and scientific rigor to be done. We're doing that work in partnership with Charles River and looking at different studies this year to explain more about what is happening in the brain. It's an exciting time for sure.
I got a 5-minute warning. I got 2 questions left. Go ahead, sir.
A little off topic, but in the sports world, whether it's high school or professional sports, are they doing a lot of work to prevent the type of injuries that you incur?
Yeah, so there's no more hitting until you're 13 in hockey. So I think they understand that, I grew up in Canada. When you can walk, you can skate, and I was hitting at 4 years old. So I think they're understanding, there's less hitting in football. You would like to see them do more. I think there's more that we can do prophylactically to protect kids, and CBD, like I mentioned, is a patented neuroprotectant, patented by the U.S. government. So we should use it,
You touched on some of the pharmacology of psilocybin and the other compounds. Could you just describe some of the structural similarities between SSRIs, or drugs used for migraines, and maybe the receptors, or how they're actually working on a structural basis?
Go ahead. Well, specifically, psilocin is a serotonin analog, right? So it floods the receptor sites with what the body thinks is serotonin. And same with the other tryptamine alkaloids, right? They're all structurally quite similar, and they're all that's why they're all 5-HT2A receptor agonists, because of their chemical structure. Yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah.
So the one thing I shared, we have full translational capability. So we do most things in-house from A to Z, except for commercial manufacturing at this point. But what we do shelve out is our receptor binding data. So we've sent a multitude of these products that we could see they're hitting multiple different receptors, agonizing and antagonizing.
All right. Well, I've got the wrap signal, so I want to say thank you to you all for some great questions. I want to say thank you to this fantastic panel on a really fascinating topic. Absolutely unbelievably fascinating to me. Appreciate your time. So there it is. We have Evan Levine, Ben Lightburn, Justin Dye, and Dan Corcillo. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Great panel.